afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Mod Driven. So as I'm out here cruising around in my new-ish, to me, Honda Civic, I get to thinking, what regrets do I have in buying a used Honda Civic? There are two regrets that I have. First of all, let me tell you the story, the short story. I was looking for a manual transmission, and specifically a Honda Civic coupe. I wanted a coupe. I like the coupes. I've never had one, especially in a manual. So I thought, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna find one somewhere, and I'm gonna go to CarMax because I trust CarMax, and I've actually bought several vehicles from them, and they seem to have the biggest selection, if you will. So I find one at CarMax, but the problem is it happens to be located across the country. It's in Florida. I'm in South Texas, so I have to pay to get it here. If you didn't know, you can buy cars from CarMax most times. There are some that they won't ship, but you can pay for shipping to get it to your local CarMax, and then you can go in and test drive it or whatever. You're not committed to buying it, but you do have to pay that shipping cost. Whatever it costs to get it there for you to see, you are liable for. You cannot get that back, and it does not come off the price of the car. So my first regret is that I paid $799 to get the car here. Not because I wouldn't have done it. I wanted this car. So I knew that going in, obviously. I ponied up the dollars to buy it, right? But nonetheless, it's a regret that I had to spend money just to get a car here that I'd have the privilege of buying. Not a big deal. It's part of the game when you're buying a car remotely from CarMax. Second one, and you may be able to hear it, there's a rattle, a screeching sound. It's coming from right behind you over there. I've talked about this in the videos before, so if you want to know more about it, just check out some of the previous videos. But it has a rattle, and that's something that you wouldn't know unless you spent time in the car, because it's not there all the time. It's there when the car is cooler, when all the plastics are more brittle, and when you drive it for a while on a rougher kind of road, like what I'm on right now. You can probably hear the road noise because it is one of those rough kind of roads. It's not something that would stop me from buying the car, but it is something that I would suppose I wouldn't have had I bought the car brand new. Now, that's not an option with the Honda Civic Coupe because they don't make it anymore. They quit making it in 2020. That was the last year. I believe that was the last year. Maybe 2022. I don't recall off the top of my head. But either way, you can't buy a brand new Honda Civic Coupe anymore. Nor can you get an Accord coupe. They're gone. They just killed the whole coupe line. And I guess I understand that. The coupe market's probably pretty slim anyway, in the Honda anyway. People that buy them are probably buying them for family hauling and grocery getters and stuff like that. So they buy the four-door. It makes perfect sense to me, but I don't like it. So the regret there is that I do have a car that has a rattle in the front. I think it's going to be pretty easy to fix, actually, because when I push down on the panel, if I give it a smack, it goes away completely, at least for a while. But if I push down on it, it goes away as well. So I think I know exactly where it is, and I think I know exactly what's causing the problem. So not a big issue. These are petty things, really. Now, the question would beg then, why even buy a Honda? Well, I've had Hondas in the past, particularly the Civics. I've had one Accord, and I did have the minivan back when the kidlets were little, and I always had great luck with them. No issues, no problems, good, reliable cars. They held their value well, and they didn't cost a fortune to buy, except that minivan. That minivan was expensive, but the cars themselves, not too bad. I've also had the Hatchback, as well as the Honda Civic Type R. And I really did like that Type R. It's a blast to drive. The only issue I had with it is it's made for skinny teenage boys. I say that not to dog skinny teenage boys, I wish I was a skinny teenage boy. But because they're so narrow in the seats are bolstered, relatively heavy on the sides, and they really hug you in there. You have to kind of overcome that door entry hump to get in. It just wasn't comfortable. I guess that's a sign of my more mature age. I just didn't like jumping in over the edges to get in. Not to mention the cost on those things. You know, they weren't cheap. I had to pay, and this is the only time I've done this, unless you count the shipping costs, but I had to pay a premium to get that car because I bought it when it was first available, and that was $5,000. That's $5,000 out the door. You know, when I sold it, probably a year later, or traded it actually, I didn't get that $5,000 back. Something I will never do again. You know, the car would have to be pretty darn special now for me to pay a premium, other than shipping, I guess, to get any car, really. But the manual transmission in this car, you know, I learned how to drive on a manual transmission. Got to admit, back in the day when I was driving that Plymouth K car, the worst manual transmission ever, that's what I learned how to drive on. And it was a great car to learn how to drive on because it was so bad. I mean, if you could become proficient at driving a Honda or a Plymouth K car, you're probably going to be able to drive any manual transmission out there. Not a problem. So that's what I learned to drive on. And then after the years passed and I got more proficient at it, I really did love driving the manual. But I have found, after having several manuals over the years, the most recent was a Toyota Tacoma 6-speed manual, which I'm not going to say it was the worst manual because that was the Plymouth K car, but yeah, it was not a fun manual to drive. It was clunky, notchy, rattled around a lot. You could feel the transmission bounce. I mean, it was just not good. And this was a 2020, so it's not like I bought one that was 20 years old. You'd have thought it'd been better, but I think Toyota really just abandoned the manual. They didn't do any improvements on it, and you got what you got. However, the Honda manual transmission, in my opinion, for your normal everyday cars, your normal stock type cars, not your high-end cars, is the benchmark. Their manual transmission is so simple to drive, so smooth, goes through the gears well. I mean, it is a pleasure to drive. And I would say anybody out there who's looking to learn how to drive a manual transmission, if you can put your hands on a Honda, that's what you ought to be learning how to drive in, because it's very forgiving and very easy to drive. Leave a comment. Let me know if you've ever owned a Honda manual and what did you think of it. I'd be curious to know. Also, real quick, I do have 2 additional channels. Rob Motive, all about the Toyota Tacoma, and Rob Motive JT, all about the Jeep Gladiator. Check them out, and if you're interested, why not subscribe? And while you're at it, smash the subscribe button here too. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.